Um, Today's October 30th, 2021. I took my son, Anthony the Third, Cat Scratch. I sometimes call him Henri Lossier for Notre Dame. But he is my Mayan calendar baby for sure, the long and short term count after Y2K. And Alexander the Great arrived first. So Anthony and I are alone. And I took him to the park. And we're sitting on the swings, he and I, and we're swinging together. And all of a sudden, this group of children came over. They're more teenagers. I find that teenagers in this category tend to be very passively aggressive. Like there's a lot of underlying aggression that's rumbling at the surface. I'm not quite sure why. A lot of the teenagers that I'm around, I do not interact. I give them their privacy. We just, I just stay with my son. I don't stare. I don't, if they want to interact or have a scene play out near me in vicinity for some reason, as long as they're not actively aggressive towards me, I'm fine. I normally just go about my business and try to keep my son safe, that is all. So today we were on the swings and there was just that. There was a group of, I think there were three. They were not of my lineage. They were of my color. They just were not of my lineage. I don't know where on the globe they could have possibly originated from. First, the one boy is talking of, his mom was taking pictures of them. His mom was close. Actually, they were in an assortment of color range. We'll say value range. But I don't like to say value range, but that's actually an artistic that they might actually know. They know more than I do, for sure. They were talking about their band, but their band being brass band. He was saying something about a low brass section, which I always like to listen to their words, their English words, because I don't even know these things, and then I like to just sit there and imagine what it must look like being able to take part in these things that I've never really learned or been involved with, not in like full whatever measure. And then they were talking about Valorant. He kept saying it, and I apologized. I said, sometimes my ear, it's hard for me to decipher. I said, it's not you, it's me. I'm trying to actually get what you're saying. So he said something about Valor, then he said something about Astrid. Then he said, an Astrid that I know of is a completely different, as far as I know, he's not Albanese, he's Albania. That's what I would say he is. But they were talking about a different Astrid, supposedly. And he kept saying Valor, but almost like Valley is what it sounded like. Then I'm thinking valedictorian, and I'm going, that's like the head of the class, or like the upper echelon, or like the one out of a group that made something of themselves, or that is the, I don't know, whatever. Then it became Valley Girl, which for me is indicative of Silicon Valley, some problem I have with San, S-A-N, and then the three-letter pairing of J-A-Y with this Last Samurai business that I don't know about. I've heard clips, phrases, bits, bytes, but the cipher is very cryptic and confusing. Then then I interrupted them and I said, they stopped speaking. I said, can I ask you gentlemen a question? And they looked, and I said, I heard you speaking. I was like, what is this valor that you speak of, or valley, or valorant? I couldn't understand exactly. So they said it's some kind of video game. And I had said to them, I said, now, my children had something called for video game. They had something that was called an Xbox or a PlayStation, but it was specific target games. I was like, is this game that you're speaking of? I was like, is this something on the computer? And they said yes. And I said, now, just I've heard with these computers that the games are large or can be large, and then they take up all. Are you able, is it like one tower per game, or are you, he's like, no, it's not like that. And I was like, all right. I was like, well, could you explain, like, what is it about, like, what's the storyline? And so they were very honest and upfront. They said it's a first person shooter game. Just give me a second, baby doll.
Ben's on the line.
All right, hey Ben. They said it was a first-person shooter game.
I got
Then
all these,
they said to me,
so this is like my Pokemon card table. And that.
Nucci's on the phone with Benjamin.
This is like cards that are like really good cards, but they're like not in the best condition. And then these are just like in good
I'm
condition
still here
cards.
with this
These are like
on.
good cards that are in good condition.
But
And
he's explaining to me
cards
about this
I pulled
Valor
today
game,
was,
or Valorant game. He said it's first-person shooter. Then he tells me that you're supposed to run around and put and place bombs in things. And I'm like, really? I was like, and this is a popular game? And they're like, yeah. And then he said, and then there's a
two of them are worth $9, and I don't know how much the
something
other one
that deactivates it, or he's another word, to defuse the bomb. I was like, and then he's like, and so this way, but it's you go and you put them around, and then it's for the teams to defuse their own.
It's in like PSA,
but you just, and I'm like, I'm taking myself.
I'd say like.
It sounds to me like national security game and a problem. Like, you're supposed to put all these bombs out in the public and then, like, go around and, like, prod people to defuse the bombs before they go off. Like, this doesn't sound like a good way to be running the things, but this is the games that they're playing here in New York, and I'm like, I mean, my children don't take part in this stuff, so, I mean, and I don't know if they even know what this is, so I'm like, let me ask you a question. I was like, if you don't mind me asking, who makes this game? And they said, Riot. And I'm like, wait, what, who? Because I'm thinking Ryan, which is upper and lowercase gamma, and then Alexander and myself. And I'm like, and so he said, I said, wait, Riot? Like RIOT? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, oh, all right. I was like, oh, that's bizarre. And then I'm thinking Riot Act. I'm like, well, that's the way the Riot Act, like, people's always, I've heard them say, the writing is on the wall. Yeah, okay, that's one thing. Then I'm up against the wall. Yeah, that one fits too. My grandfather used to say it's better than a punch on the nose. Right, I still agree. And then there's the Riot Act. That's where they go out purposely and they set up bombs in multiple locations, and then it becomes some kind of a game so they can do more devious and nefarious script planning and premeditated whatevers in dangerous places. So I'm just curious, who defuses the bombs in this theoretical case that these teenagers were speaking openly to me about in a play yard? which had a chartreuse-colored Canadian maple leaf, not the traditional white and red. And then it had a blue, white, and orange. And then it had the traditional, this flag. They took down the black and white POW flag that matches this pattern. I don't know why, and I don't know who's in charge of it. But that was disturbing that they took it down, considering I'm still there. In an MIA POW. And then I'm thinking to myself, now POW is the first three letters of that man that called himself a state secretary. But I don't know with whom he was a state secretary. They made mention of New York, but I don't know if that, like, do they all have to agree on those positions? Is that for the United States of America president to appoint? I'm just curious, because it gets a little confusing why I would be missing in action while there was a POW and then an ELL in spelling of positions in some uniform, while the world is not being televised properly, I'm not being educated properly, and the health lighting outside is becoming more and more dangerous, with some riot act setting off these mini emergency things and then other things going unacknowledged that are really important. Star 1978, Star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza. It's October 30th, 2021. And it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361. I walked by a NYPD officer earlier with new chief coming home from the park. And for the first time ever, I saw one of the officers did this. The other officer I'd walked by before, in other situations, the same officer who personality has a good New York characteristic to him. If we were on a movie set, he would definitely be one of my picks in keeping a calm, cool head and security force, not jumping to conclusions, since there's a lot involved in this. And it was really just nice because they had a wonderful demeanor, the two of them, as I walked by, which I appreciate, even though I don't always point it out because it's embarrassing for me anyway. But I do appreciate their presence. Not all of the NYPD is that way, might I add, but these specific crew that seems to be rotating, but for the most part, the faces that I see are of the caliber that makes it not so intimidating for myself anyway, walking backwards and forwards with them, being able to say what I need to say, but not being intimidated by them into, like, quieting my whatever, since I appreciate their individualness, but there are some pieces of their private law firm or their public law firm or their whatever they're classified as in a larger schematic. They can be intimidating force, but they are not perfect, and neither is the other versions of them that are shadow corps around here. But there are some things that need to be worked out for their safety and for mine. So I appreciate when they quietly are just kind to my face, at least. So at least I go off with a nice feeling. And feel safe in this panic safe room, as opposed to feeling like my life is in danger because they exist. I'd like to think and live in a world where I'm safer because they exist in some form or fashion on the corner of where I have to walk every day. to think if there's anything else that is pertinent to that one piece. I did let out earlier this part about the sun, the dome, meaning the sky, the clouds that look like they're included in it and sometimes separate. Sometimes it's blue in its color, sometimes it's white or opaque or pearl in its color. Almost like a mood ring is what the sky is, and that indelible lighting affects our health and the energy system that keeps our health, which the hospitals and the doctor's offices don't teach, but that's not how they were originally arranged. Oh, the other part was Amazon starts with AMA and then it's Zone, ZONE. When Jenny lived next door, she identified as a Korean. I didn't know to ask North or South at the time. I had never even heard of a Korean. I did notice that she looked very different than myself. She said I was a Northern Italian. That's what my grandfather was, so that's what she was going to identify me as. And they go by district and zone where she's kept safe. And that was important since at some point I might have a red balloon or whatever. But I noticed that AMA is I thought originally it was supposed to be the Army Medical, but then it turned into American Medical Association. Then there's the American Movie Awards and American Music Awards. So there's a lot of AMAs, and I'm looking around and I'm concerned because I don't have any of the AMAs that look like me that can calm me down and give me some direction because I can't find them. I don't know who they are. I don't know how anybody even researches a human on this. I mean, it's confusing, especially at this level that I'm at, which is just, I arrived in Bayside in 1978 and then whatever got moved around like by the adults in my life and then just forgotten about, pushed out the door and like whatever. So it's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza, Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361. It's Earth, Solar System, Milky Way, Universe, Galaxy is broken. And now on a larger scale, timing mechanic. If there's no symbols, there's no numbers, there's no phonics, there's no sound anywhere. We're just in a vacuum. I'm in my test tube, resting on an auger, where there's other things moving about, but I exist in the system, single, solo, separate, than the rest of the microbiota. Inside my one test tube, where I was inoculated into by sterile and then sealed inside of it, I was able to create by my own body cavity and then deliver in gestation. So I shared umbilical and placental gestation, if time is such a thing, quantity of some sort, in quanta string. And then when I delivered him into the dimensional world where others could see him, touch him, and feel him, like if I allowed such a thing, then there's another dimension of this arrangement of human and some form of quanta time. He and I share on what the humans or the microbiota where I was resting my test tube, the other microflora on the agar had a existing system of counting, phonetics, timing, of tracking, of whatever, separate from my own gestational and delivery schedule of this one special, what they call immaculate child, and immaculate conception and immaculate delivery. I was not earthbound or AGER resting when I had, if the AGAR is labeled as New York State, I was not on a New York AGAR with microflora when I conceived this extra special child in an extra special method, in an extra special way, that then became the human incarnation or inoculation of Alexander James. And then the last name by Fish and by Merlin is Romer, but that's for Meridian and Maritime, for calendar timing, equinox, and marine life, not for Army and AMA. Two totally different standards of everything. Alexander and I are something completely different than what AMA is. Even though I'm resting on an AMA auger, I still have a single solo separate test tube, and I have a single solo separate relation with something from the great beyond, which is what we call it at GB. And that's all that I'm going to say about that. But it is a special relation between a biological supposed clock with two hands, a connection time between the two of us, an umbilical placental relation and gestation, and then there is incarnation time, of when he joined me in the inoculated tube, where we are resting somewhere in an AMA, but I need to get back to Maritime, Meridian, and flawlessness in communicating with me. And that's just, those are facts. Those are actual prime benefactor facts of how time and space exists outside of what current reality is explaining to one another it is. And how could it be so off? Again, it's October 30th, 2021. It's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza.